Hi, my name is Jakub Klitanek, Koobs for short, and today I'm going to be doing a video based on the paper Game Accessibility, a survey. The paper was put together by Bei Yen, who is a graduate from the University of Nevada who now works for the state of Nevada, and also Elk Former, an assistant professor, and Frederick C. Harris Jr., a professor at the Department of Computer Science and Engineering for the University of Nevada. Video games have become mainstream entertainment. There's no arguing that their main form of source of entertainment nowadays is even to the case that they're beating Hollywood box office sales. It's an actual estimated fact of 63% of the US population have actually played video games. Even the papers have stated 1 in 3 UK households own a Nintendo Wii. So why are video games so popular? What causes them to be more interesting than other kind of forms of entertainment? The authors put forward a very good point, which is as follows. Video games provide something that other forms of media cannot provide: interaction. Video games are becoming more than just entertainment. You'll find them that it's spreading, it's expanding. You'll find them in schools, there's education, they're being used in health to rehabilitate people in physiotherapy. They're even getting dragged into religion and politics. But even though there is this expansion in place, video games are still not accessible to everyone. Technology is difficult to access for users with disabilities. It's a very good point. It's the kind of thing though that even people that don't have disabilities may have certain issues. Take as the perfect example. Actually, I'll demonstrate this example. Mom! Could you do that video recording of Stargate for me tonight?
So how do we do that again?
My point been proven. I'll show you in a minute.
Okay.
Thank you. But, as I was saying, it doesn't matter, because whenever there's a new piece of technology that's been introduced to the public, there'll always be research done into how to make it more accessible. There have been 2 attempts at trying to make guidelines for video games. The first recorded attempt was by the Independent Game Developer Association, IGDA for short. The second attempt was then made by the Norwegian organisation called Media LT. They took the original ones by the IGDA and then combined them with their own to make a total of 34 guidelines. The idea behind these guidelines was to give developers a chance to kind of incorporate some steps into their game development to take into account the different disabilities that could be affecting different people and how to overcome them. However, there are some issues with these guidelines. They often assume an absolute validity, but in practice are only applicable in specific contexts. So, what does that mean? Well, let's take the actual guideline of allow the game to have variable speeds. Would that apply to a game that is turn-based, such as Final Fantasy X's turn-based battle system? The reasons for this paper, as the authors put it, are broken into 3 different points. Point 1. To find out how a disability affects a game and the gameplay experience. Reason number 2. To identify the strategies that are currently put in place to tackle these barriers that are raised. And point number 3. To look into further research and how to research and make these strategies more effective. There is another reason behind this paper as well. How many times do you think that people are aware of the possibilities that there is a disability stopping people playing a video game? I'm pretty sure that if you go to some major big developers, that it's not the first thing on their mind. Probably the first thing on their mind is, pump out more games, make more money, not a pretty sight. How are we going to get to these 3 points? First things first, we need to know what we're dealing with. We had FPS, strategy, sports, RPG, puzzle, racing, dance and rhythm, and adventure. But what genres are missing, and why do you think they're not included? Now, to know the difficulties that people have interacting with video games, we need to know how they interact with said video games. The authors have done this, and they've come up with the following: an interaction sequence diagram, and an interaction definitive state machine. Not a time machine, even though it does look a bit like a flux capacitor, but a normal kind of straightforward definitive state machine. Also, it does look a lot like Bernard Perron's heuristic circle of gameplay. Now, to make the game interaction model a bit more easier for me to explain, I've made my own version, a simple flowchart just to go through the different steps that are available on it. It looks a little bit like this. Now, with the game interaction model, there are 3 basic steps. You receive stimuli. This can come in 3 different forms: visual, what you can see; auditory, what you can hear; and haptic, what you feel. This stimuli can then be divided into 2 further categories. Primary stimuli, that if it's not perceived by the player, the game can't be played at all. Most games use vision as the stimuli. And then there's secondary stimuli. This is added to kind of enhance the player's experience. And while it's not needed, it can reduce the gameplay experience if not present. The second step, determine a response. The player needs to mentally work out what has to be done next, based on what they've just received. And the final step, provide input. Once the player has worked out what they need to do, then they need to physically put those actions into the actual game, so the game knows what they want to do. Now, there are 2 types of input. Analog input, which monitors your input over time. An analog stick is a perfect example. And there's also discrete input. Input that works on the idea of the switch being pressed and released. In a short while we'll be going over how hearing and visual impairments affect the player, gameplay and interactivity. We'll also be looking at a couple of games that tackle these barriers. While we're on the subject of barriers, there are 2 types of barriers that are raised: critical barriers, which prevent the video game from being played, and non-critical, which you can still play the game, but it will be a reduced playing experience. Now, the classifications that I'll be using and that are used within the paper are based on the World Health Organization's manual, International Classifications of Impairments, Disabilities and Handicaps, ICIDH for short. Visual impairment. This is caused by the inability to see or see well through either one eye or both eyes. This causes havoc for any player that wants to play a video game due to the fact that majority of video games use visual stimuli as the primary stimuli for that game. And as we know from before, without the primary stimuli, the game can't be played, which causes a massive critical barrier to any kind of game player. At first, I was a little bit kind of, you can't really make a video game for a blind person as such. To me, it wasn't a case that blind people shouldn't play video games, don't get me wrong on that. It was more a case of, for example, vegetarians eating a vegetarian sausage. Well, no, you're not eating a vegetarian sausage. How would you know what the flavour of a sausage would taste like if you're a vegetarian? Why would you want to know what the flavour of a sausage tastes like if you're a vegetarian? It was kind of along that line of thought, and it was a really stupid, strange line of thought that I went down. And it was only until I saw an actual video production of a kind of an alpha test of a game called Blind Hero, which was worked on by the authors, may I add, that I realised actually the video game doesn't have to have visions in it for the player to be able to enjoy it. One of the great things about Blind Hero is that not only does the player be able to play the game, but the actual people who are watching can enjoy watching the player play the game. It makes more sense in the video clip that you're watching right now because of the fact that you can see exactly what I'm saying. The player is enjoying himself, he's able to kind of perceive what stimuli and what he should be doing next, yet we're able to see it in just a slightly different way than to how that he actually feels it. One of the strategies we've seen to take over the visual impairment that someone may have is to replace the actual visual feedback with a haptic feedback, which is done with Blind Hero through the glove. But there are other tactics that have been put in place. For example, in many puzzle games, you'll see that instead of having colours, you can put patterns onto the different blocks. This helps with people who are colourblind. Hearing impairment refers to both partial and complete loss of the ability to hear from one or both ears. But one doesn't have to be deaf or hard of hearing to suffer from a hearing impairment. It could happen very easily when, say for example, you're trying to play a video game but everyone else in the house is actually asleep, so you need to switch off the volume not to be able to wake them up, which could lead on to multitude of difficulties. Many of these will be secondary like kind of stimuli and hence non-critical boundaries. However, some of these can turn into critical boundaries when they include parts of the story that you need to be able to know to progress further along. It can even lead on further into multiplayer games such as Call of Duty, where if you're not able to communicate with each other effectively, i.e. hear and talk to them, then there's no way that you're going to be able to make a sufficient assault to actually have a chance of winning the game. From my point of view, hearing impairments are probably the most easiest to kind of make up for when it comes to video games, to make a game more accessible. There are many games out already, such as Doom 3 CC or Talk CC, which use third-party plugins to modify the game so that it has extra features such as closed captioning, which is the idea that any sound effect is described in a subtitle of some sort, or if there's any SFX that are used, there's a sound radar that tells you where it's coming from. The idea being that if there's one in front of you, the radar will have to tell you, oh look, there's a sound effect from in front of you. There are also other games such as The Sims, where if something is making a noise such as a TV or a music player, then musical notes will appear above that actual item. And also in Left 4 Dead, which is one of very few commercial games which has closed captioning as a standard. And you'll find out quite a lot of games from Valve, such as Portal, Left 4 Dead Series 1 and 2, what else was there? Team Fortress, I know has closed captioning, and Half-Life 2, which shows that Valve actually have taken that into account. That is a very important part of the game. In Left 4 Dead, I'm going to use this example again, it's really important because the music actually demonstrates which infected are going to come and when a horde's going to come and when to prepare yourself for the attack. So now we've gone through a couple of different strategies based on different impairments and disabilities and how to overcome the barriers that they present. But why should we care? In the long run, barring the actual ethical and moral grounds behind it, of why we should exclude someone from something just because of something that has happened to them that could be through no fault of their own. But there's also the fact of, wouldn't you want to be able to play video games in the future with your possible grandchildren? Wouldn't you want to be able to play video games full stop in the future? And that's not the only reason as well. By actually making the video game more accessible, you'll be increasing the actual user base behind the actual game, which will then actually increase the amount of money that the actual game will possibly generate. Saying that, I'm not also kind of trying to say that when you design a game, you've got to have the accessibility in your mind all the time. Not at all. If you do that, then you're going to be restricting yourself and then you may miss out on making the best game ever. However, what you should do is after you've designed the game, after you've got the basics in place and the controls already, then look into incorporating the strategies that we've gone through today, if not all of them. Reading this paper has been enlightening for me. It's not the kind of thing that I took into consideration when I was actually going into the idea of developing a video game. However, I hope that by watching this vodcast, you'll be enlightened as well. And it's a shame that I'm not able to go through the subject a bit more thoroughly due to time restraints. However, that isn't preventing you from going to find out more information by yourself. I'm going to put a list of websites that you may find of interest at the end, during the credits, and feel free to go and check it out when you have a chance. My name is Koobs, and I'd like to say thank you for watching.